Buenas, 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 buenas. This is Melanie. I hope you're doing well. I am playing around with Screenomatic, who it's allowing me to lecture from home and allowing you to see my screen. I could do both where you can see my screen and you can see me, but let me tell you, you do not want to see me right now. No. So, with that being said, you're just looking at my screen. I used this before in terms of like experimenting. So, I've never done a full lecture on this actual device or this program. So let's see. Someone said that it only maxes up to 15 minutes, so I may need to do several of them. We'll see. So please bear with me. All right. So if we were in class, I would be talking about our parenting chapter. If we think about everything that we covered pre midterm, we talked about the schools of thought as it relates to sociology of family. We talked about the different definitions of family, both the government definition and our class text definition. We talked about the different structure of families, such as blended families and nuclear families and extended and foster, and a whole range of those. We talked about four theories and looking at analyzing analyzing family pretty much. We talked about gender and gender identity and gender roles, gender expression. We talked about love, right? And the different types of love and the different frame relationships. What else did we do? We talked about marriage on a macro level, right? Um, as well as alternatives to monogamy. And we also talked about domestic violence type relationships. So we did all of that. You're taking the midterm if you haven't done it yet. You're to do that. And then now we're moving into really the last half of the semester where we are midway. And I'm now lecturing on parenthood, not just parenthood, but I'm also going to move into the area of childlessness and abortion and infertility. So, but I'll start off first with kind of framing the subject matter. So it's to parent or not. You may hear my dog in the background crying, being fussy. He's acting up right now. I was going to wait to do the lecture tomorrow, but it just was kind of um, weighing on me. And so I'm like, I just need to get this done. I have a lot of stuff I need to do, but he's acting a little finicky. So you may hear him in the background being grumpy. So, yes, so if we were in class, I would have you get into groups of four and I would have you do some storytelling, some of the biggest lessons that you've learned from your parents. And I would say your parents, your guardians, whoever raised you. Um, I'm, I'm going to encourage you to ask yourself these questions to be able to get into a space of deep critical thought. You don't have to share them with anyone, you don't have to share them with me. You may want to write them down, but I want you to be reflective over this. Think about some of the biggest lessons you learned from your parents or your guardians. They could be positive experiences because they did something wonderful. They could also be lessons that you've learned because they didn't do something wonderful or they did something they acted in a way that you said, you know what, I never want to parent like that. That's still an incredibly valuable lesson. So think about some of the biggest lessons, the most valuable lessons that you've learned from your parents. I also want, I believe that there's one or two parents in the group. Um, and so for those of you that are parents, be able to think about some of the biggest lessons you're learning about having children or having a child, right? That our children are also our biggest teachers if we allow ourselves to learn from them. I know one of my favorite teachers of all time is my son. He has taught me a lot, and he continues to teach me a lot. Also, ask yourself, what did you wish you were told before having children, right? Children changes things. And as we go over this chapter, you'll see it. Sociology is critical of everything, everything, including self and others. We already know the positives about parenting. We know that children are a blessing. We know the kind of, for lack of a better word, kumbaya nature of children. But sociology makes the invisible visible and is critical of everything, even if it's not socially acceptable to do so. I think that's why I love sociology so much. And so I'm gonna share some stuff with you that we typically don't hear about having children, that might not feel so warm and fuzzy, but it's very real. I hope that makes sense. Let's move on. So when we look at having children, um, historically we were going to have children. It wasn't a conscious decision. People simply got married and they had children, right? If we look at the institutional marriage period, it was socially acceptable and expected of you to have children and get married. And if you didn't, especially if you were a woman or got married later on in life, it was very taboo. It was very much seen as something's wrong with you, and you could really be shunned. So we've come a long way. Today, now it's more of a conscious effort now than ever. Some of you might say, I clearly want children. Maybe I want children. Oh, no, I don't want children. Or maybe, oh, hell no, I don't want children, right? You have much more an option now than you ever have been. Now, sometimes we do find ourselves in enclaves where that are a little more traditional, religious communities. If you find yourself in a very religious community, or if you are come from a more traditional home, I think of like Mexicano homes, not necessarily Mexican American homes, but Mexicano homes where it's very clear of like, no, you're going to get married and you're going to have kids. And you might even hear it on a regular basis. You might hear it every holiday of like, when are you going to get married? When are you going to have kids? And you're like, mom or tia, I'm only 21, right? So you might find yourself in those enclaves. But if you take a step back and you look at it on a macro level, it's more of a conscious decision than it ever has been to be able to say if I want children, when I want children, and how many, if any, right? Okay, so moving along. So, what we find ourselves in is this contradiction or social contradiction. On the left hand side, you're going to hear there's a script in which we hear folks say in the United States. And on the right hand side, we're gonna talk a little bit about the social context of the environments we find ourselves in that contradict the narrative of what people are saying, right? So first I want to begin with the script of the pronatalist bias. These are strong norms to having children. This is the expectation still that you're going to have children. While it's more of a choice today than ever, it's still a pressure to have children, even if it's not as overt or open, but a little more subtle. People, and it's so interesting. So, for those of you that don't know if you want children or clearly don't want children, then you're familiar with this. People, if it comes up and you say, I don't want children, other people expect you to justify it. Well, why don't you want children? Right? As if it's abnormal. But you never see it the other way around. And what I mean by that is you don't see it as when people say, yes, I want children, people don't necessarily um, um, interrogate you of, well, why do you want children, right? Justify it. But it only goes in one direction. Why don't you want children? Because it's almost as if you should want them, right? Typically, when someone is dating for a while, people will ask, when are you going to get married? Right? And you might hear this often. When are you going to get married? When are you going to get married? Okay, you get married. Then the next immediate question is, when are you going to have a kid? When are you going to have a child? When are you going to have a child? You have a child. The child is an infant still. And then the next question is, when are you going to have another? It's as if society is on this escalator, right? This escalator that is going a specific direction effortlessly. And there's this push into to go that way. And if you are critically minded, if you're pausing to think, do I want to go in that direction? That there's a force pushing you in that direction to not even really think about it, really. um, I encourage you throughout this lecture to maybe get off of that escalator, pause, think about it critically. For Pete's sakes, it's your life, right? So think about this critically and say, do I want to move in that direction, or is it simply expected of me, right? Or that's what I'm quote unquote supposed to do, right? That doesn't lead to happiness. That leads oftentimes to resentment and really a sense of emptiness. So what's interesting, your book talks about the connection between being um, that being a mother for women. It doesn't talk about about men, which is interesting, but really that being a mother is highly connected to one's identity. So 83% of North American women say being or becoming a mother is important to their identity. If you think about that correlation, 83%, that's a huge percent where it's intertwined. Like my identity is connected to if and when I'm going to be a mother. So what does that mean if you can't have children? What does that mean to one's identity, right? Or so yeah, I think that I find that fascinating. There is a history that's related to that. So if we want to understand anything today, we have to look at its history, right? That's really kind of what sociologists do. We look at a situation and what's going on, but we look at the context around it. So, for example, to answer why that is such a high percentage of women um, connecting their identity to motherhood is because women's social value or the social status or the degree of social worth that is or that has been given to women has been connected to the relationship with the men in their life, in particular their husband. Yes, I mean husband, it's a heterosexual bias, and their relationship to their children. So mothers had a higher status than non-mothers. Married women, wives, have a higher social value than singles. That's deeply rooted in its history. So it would make sense that today you still see residue of that, if not more than residue. Right? So hopefully that makes sense. And hopefully this is still recording, or I might just be flapping in my mouth for no reason here, talking to my dog. So so far, everything that I talked about was a script in which people are saying, when are you going to have a kid? When are you going to have a kid? Why don't you want a child? And pushing you in this direction, the pronatalist bias. But we find ourselves in a context or environments that are rooted in structural antinatalism. Structural antinatalism, excuse me, is a bias against having children or at least not having sufficient support for parents and their children. So it's saying two things. Miklo. Sorry, my dog's named Miklo. So we see two things. We see one, a bias against having children. So really finding our environments that are they want all of you as an employee. So they don't want you as a mother or a father. They want you as an employee. So having responsibilities outside of that role get in the way, right? We typically see that with women because women are still statistically the primary caregiver. Also, the second part is, or at least not having sufficient support for parents and their children. So it says, folks are saying, have children, have families, but yet you work 9 to 5 with a really rigid schedule, but your child gets out at 3, or you have a little one and your child gets out at noon because they're in preschool or kindergarten, and you have to figure that out. Doctor appointments, but you have a rigid schedule and it's not flexible, or you get sick, or let's say your child gets sick and you have to leave work because you have to take care of your child, but then that child gets another child sick, and then after that child gets sick, you get sick, and there's a constant ding, a constant disqualification that's given to you from your place of employment that is not